There is a specific kind of morning that exists only inside a marriage you believe is working. The kind where you make 2 cups of coffee without thinking about it, where the sound of your wife moving through the house is so familiar it registers as silence, where the ordinary weight of a shared life feels like the most solid thing you own. I had those mornings for 8 years. I made 2 cups of coffee. I listened to the familiar sounds. I believed, without examining the belief, that what I had was sound. I want to tell you about the morning that particular version of my life ended. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sudden. It arrived the way structural damage arrives. Not in the moment of collapse, but in the quiet accumulation of stress the building had been absorbing for longer than anyone had been measuring. Hello, everyone. My name is Mark. I'm 35 years old, and until about 10 months ago, I would have told you I was one of the fortunate ones. I work as a financial analyst at an investment firm, a job that requires a particular kind of precision, the ability to read patterns in data and understand what they're predicting before the prediction becomes visible to everyone else. I'm good at it. I am, professionally, a man who sees what's coming. I did not see what was coming at home. I had been married to Anna for 8 years. We had a daughter, Emma, who was 5 years old and had recently developed a passionate and exclusive interest in penguins, their biology, their habitat, their social structures, with the focused intensity of a child who has decided that the rest of the animal kingdom can wait. Anna was 33, a project manager at a tech company, organized and socially skilled, and possessed of the specific warmth of someone who makes everyone around them feel competent and cared for. I loved her. I trusted her entirely. I was still trusting her entirely on the Thursday evening when she told me she had a late meeting, and I made dinner for Emma alone and thought nothing of it except that I hoped the meeting wouldn't run too long. The meeting, I would later discover, ran approximately 4 months. Let me take you back to early spring, because that's where it started, not the affair, which had its own timeline I would piece together later, but the first visible hairline fracture in the surface of the life I believed I was living. March. The apartment was warm in the specific way of a home that has been inhabited long enough to have its own temperature. The radiators clicking in the evenings, the smell of Emma's bath products, and the particular coffee blend Anna had been buying for 3 years, and the faint trace of the basil plant on the kitchen windowsill that she replaced every few weeks without comment, as if its presence were simply a condition of the house rather than a choice. These were the textures of my daily life. I knew them the way you know your own breathing, without attention, without gratitude, without the understanding that familiarity is not the same as permanence. Anna had always worked hard. Project management in a tech company was not a gentle job. Deadlines compressed, clients changed direction, teams needed managing with a combination of firmness and diplomacy that she was genuinely skilled at. Late evenings had happened before, occasionally, when a launch was imminent or a crisis needed managing. What changed in March was the frequency. Once a week became twice, became a pattern that settled into Thursday evenings with the regularity of something that had been scheduled rather than demanded by circumstance. I noted this without alarm. She told me about the project, a major client migration, complex, the kind of thing that justified the hours. I believed her because the explanation was plausible and because I had no framework yet for questioning it. The phone was the first thing I noticed that didn't fit the explanation. Anna had never been secretive about her phone. In 8 years of marriage, there had been nothing covert about her digital life. Her phone sat on the kitchen counter, charged in the bedroom openly, was picked up and set down without the choreography of privacy. What I noticed in March was a subtle change in this. Not dramatic, not sudden, but a new habit of carrying it rather than leaving it. A new angle when she typed that kept the screen away from wherever I happened to be. Once I came into the kitchen and she closed something quickly, not in the startled way of someone caught, but in the practiced way of someone who had been doing this long enough that the reflex was smooth. I told myself, work project, confidential client information. This was a plausible explanation for a project manager, and I accepted it as such. Our daughter Emma, who had no investment in my comfort, noticed something before I did. She came to me on a Sunday morning in April with the specific gravity of a 5-year-old delivering important information. "Daddy," she said, "Mummy was crying in the bathroom last night." I looked at her. "Are you sure?" "I heard her," Emma said. "But when I knocked, she said she was fine." I asked Anna about it that evening. She said she'd had a stressful week and had needed a moment. She said it with the openness of someone sharing something real, and I accepted it and held her and thought the conversation was complete. It wasn't complete. I understand that now. The bathroom crying was not stress, or rather, it was stress, but the stress of a woman managing more than she was telling me. The specific distress of someone navigating a situation that had become more complicated than they'd intended. I didn't know this then. I believed the week had been stressful. My closest friend David came over for dinner in late April. David had known me since we were 9 years old. A friendship of the specific durability that survives distance and life change because it was built before either of us knew how to be anything other than honest with each other. He was easy with Anna in the way of someone who had watched a marriage from close proximity for 8 years and was comfortable in it. After dinner, while Anna was putting Emma to bed, David said, "She seems tired." "Work project," I said. He nodded. He didn't push. But he held my eyes for a moment in the specific way of a man who has more to say and has decided not to say it yet, and I filed that moment away without examining it. That night, lying in bed while Anna slept beside me, I lay awake and thought about David's eyes and Emma's bathroom report and the phone with its new angle and the Thursday evenings, and I thought, these things are probably nothing. And I thought, I am saying probably because I'm not certain, and I've never not been certain before. The uncertainty was new, and new uncertainties, I was learning, have a way of not staying small. Mark enters the story inside a marriage he has experienced as sound precisely because he has not been examining it. His trust in Anna is architectural rather than active, built into the foundation of his daily life rather than maintained as a conscious practice. The financial analyst who reads patterns and data professionally has not been reading the patterns at home, and the story's first section is the account of those patterns beginning to register against his will. Emma's bathroom report is the section's most emotionally significant detail. The 5-year-old who heard her mother crying and knocked on the door and was told everything was fine is a small, precise image of the way this family's surface has been holding while something underneath it shifts. David's held gaze, more to say, deciding not to say it yet, establishes that others in Mark's orbit are already reading a situation he is still giving the benefit of the doubt. The gap between what Mark's professional instincts would tell him if applied to this data set and what his emotional investment allows him to conclude is the section's central tension, a man trained to see what's coming, choosing not to look. May arrived, and the Thursday evenings continued, and I began, without fully acknowledging I was doing it, to pay a different kind of attention. The late returns had a new texture. Anna came home on Thursday evenings with the specific resettled quality I had initially attributed to the transition from a demanding work environment to a domestic one, the unwinding that happens when you move between different kinds of pressure. But as May progressed, I started to notice that the unwinding was happening before she came through the door rather than after it. She arrived already recalibrated, already composed, in a way that suggested the transition had occurred somewhere between the office and home rather than in the course of the evening. She was also dressing differently on Thursdays. This is the kind of observation that makes a person feel petty for making it, and I felt petty, which is why it took me 3 weeks to name it to myself. Anna had always been well-dressed. Her job required professional presentation, and she took it seriously. But there was something different about the Thursday preparation, a more deliberate selection of clothes in the morning, a perfume I recognized as one she'd bought new in April and wore specifically on days she had external meetings. The perfume on a Thursday evening, when the meeting was internal. Small things, individually accountable. Together they were assembling into something I didn't have a name for yet. The emotional distance arrived in May too, subtle, not the cold distance of a marriage in open conflict, but the softer distance of a person whose attention is partially elsewhere. She was present at dinner, present for Emma's bedtime, present in conversation. But there was a quality of partial presence, as if a layer of her that used to be fully available had been reallocated to something I couldn't see. I raised it once, carefully. I said that she seemed somewhere else lately and asked if she was okay. She said the project was in a difficult phase and she was finding it hard to switch off. She said it warmly, with her hand on my arm, and I accepted it and moved the conversation forward. But I noticed that her hand on my arm had the quality of someone managing a situation rather than simply being present in one. The name Victor appeared for the first time in mid-May. Anna mentioned him over dinner. A colleague, she said, who had joined the project team as a technical lead. She mentioned him in the context of the project's progress, neutrally and in passing, and the mention was so unremarkable that I retained the name without knowing why and returned to it later, alone, with the specific persistence of a detail that is registered somewhere below the level of conscious attention. I looked him up. Victor, a LinkedIn profile confirmed him as a senior technical architect at Anna's company, joined the previous year. His profile was professional and entirely ordinary. I looked at it for longer than I had any stated reason to, and then closed the window and felt faintly ashamed of the looking. The moment that moved me from passive discomfort to active concern came on a Saturday afternoon in late May. Anna said she needed to go into the office for a few hours, a Saturday, which had happened before, but infrequently. She took Emma to my mother's first, which I thought was considerate. She was gone for 4 hours. She came home with a quality I had been cataloging for 2 months, the resettled, already transitioned quality, and kissed Emma hello and started dinner and was warm and organized and entirely present. That evening, after Emma was asleep, I sat in the kitchen with a glass of water and thought about the Saturday office visit and the Thursday evenings and Victor's name said once too neutrally and the new perfume worn on specific days and the phone with its new angle. And I thought, I am a man who reads patterns for a living. I have been refusing to read this one because I am afraid of what it says. I was done being afraid of what it said. I needed to know what it said. I called David the next morning. I told him what I'd been accumulating. He was quiet for longer than I expected. Mark, he said carefully, I saw something at the conference last month. He'd been at an industry event, different field from mine, but the same conference venue Anna's company sometimes used. He'd seen Anna in the hotel lobby, he said, with a man he didn't recognize. He hadn't said anything because he hadn't been certain what he'd seen and hadn't wanted to cause me pain over something he might have misread. Describe him, I said. He described a man who matched Victor's LinkedIn photograph closely enough to matter. I thanked David and ended the call and sat in my car in the driveway for a long time. Then I did something I had been avoiding for 2 months. I made a decision about what I was going to do next. Mark's behavior in May is the psychological portrait of motivated reasoning under sustained emotional investment. The Thursday pattern, the Thursday perfume, the resettled quality on return, Victor's name, said once with careful neutrality. Each of these is registered and filed without being acted upon, because acting upon them requires accepting a hypothesis that Mark is not ready to formalize. The observation about Anna's hand on his arm, managing a situation rather than simply being present in one, is the section's most precise psychological detail. Mark has detected inauthenticity in gesture of intimacy, which is a specific and deeply unsettling form of recognition. David's delayed disclosure is the section's structural turning point. He saw something at the hotel and said nothing because he wasn't certain and didn't want to cause pain, which is the behavior of a friend caught between loyalty and honesty. His eventual disclosure, when Mark gives him permission by calling and sharing the accumulation, releases information he had been carrying and allows Mark to cross the threshold from passive suspicion to active investigation. The car in the driveway is the section's closing image. The man who reads patterns for a living, sitting with the pattern he has finally allowed himself to read, deciding what to do with it. June. The city had moved into its summer register. Longer evenings, the particular quality of light at 7 o'clock that makes ordinary streets look significant, the warmth that stays in the pavement after the sun has gone. I hired Paul on a Wednesday in early June. The decision to hire a private investigator is not one I made lightly or quickly. I spent 4 days between David's disclosure and the call to Paul in a state of internal debate that I found more exhausting than any professional challenge I'd faced. The moral weight of surveillance, the violation of privacy, the possibility that I was wrong, the possibility that I was right, the question of what I owed Anna, the question of what I owed Emma, the question of what I owed myself. I am not going to pretend the decision was clean. It wasn't. But I am also not going to pretend I had a better option available to me. Paul was recommended by my lawyer, Julia Carter, who I had contacted in the same week, for the same preparatory instinct, and who had mentioned that in situations like this, documentation was worth more than confrontation. She gave me Paul's number with the specific matter-of-factness of someone who had seen this situation many times and understood that the people navigating it needed practical guidance rather than moral assessment. Paul was mid-40s, unremarkable in the specific way of someone whose professional effectiveness depends on being unnoticeable, and he listened to what I told him with the attention of a man taking a professional brief. He told me what he would need from me and what he would provide in return, and quoted a timeline of 2 to 3 weeks for initial findings. I signed the paperwork and drove home and made dinner and helped Emma with her penguin research and behaved for the rest of that evening with a normalcy I found both necessary and deeply strange. The red herring arrived in the second week of June, and it was thorough enough that I lost 10 days to it. Anna came home one Thursday evening and told me she had something to say. She sat down at the kitchen table with the specific directness of someone who has prepared a disclosure and is delivering it, and told me that she had been attending therapy. She'd been struggling, she said, with anxiety and some professional stress, and she'd wanted to address it properly rather than letting it affect our home life. She hadn't told me earlier because she wasn't ready to discuss it, but she felt I should know. It explained the Thursday evenings. The emotional distance, processing difficult things with a therapist rather than at home. The phone privacy, therapy notes, perhaps, or the specific privacy of someone managing something personal. I felt the relief of a man who had been bracing against something and found the floor solid. I told her I was glad she was taking care of herself. I told her she could always talk to me. She said she knew that and that it helped. I believed her completely for 10 days. Then Paul called. He had documented 4 Thursday evenings. On 3 of them, Anna had gone to a therapy appointment. He had confirmed the address as a registered clinical psychology practice. Genuine, her appointment real. On the 4th, the most recent, she had left the therapy appointment and gone somewhere else. A hotel bar in the city center. She had met a man there. Paul had photographs. The man in the photographs matched Victor's LinkedIn photograph. 2 hours at the hotel bar. Then she had left. Alone, he noted. The evening had been, he said, consistent with what he'd describe as an ongoing acquaintance rather than a first meeting. The therapy was real. It had been used, whether deliberately or not, as the framework within which something else was also happening. I sat with this information and thought about the specific sophistication of a deception that includes a genuine element. The therapy was real, and its realness had made the story that contained it real enough to hold me for 10 days. I told Paul to continue. His second report arrived 10 days later. It was comprehensive, and it was the end of the investigative phase of this story. Hotel records for 3 dates in the preceding 2 months, each corresponding to a day when Anna had been, according to her account, either at work late or at an out-of-town client meeting. Photographs of Anna and Victor together at the hotel, not explicit, but unambiguous in the way that 2 people are unambiguous when they are in a hotel together and one of them is not supposed to be there. I read the report twice, in my car, in the parking lot of my office building. Then I folded it carefully, placed it in the glove compartment, and sat for a long time watching people move across the parking lot in the afternoon light. I thought about Emma's penguin research. I thought about the bathroom crying in April, which I now understood differently. I thought about the Thursday evenings and the new perfume and Anna's hand on my arm with its quality of management. Then I drove home and made dinner and helped Emma arrange her penguin photographs in the album she'd started, and I said nothing, and I waited for the right moment. The therapy disclosure is the section's most carefully constructed causation. Anna's decision to share a genuine truth, the therapy, produces the effect of neutralizing Mark's investigation for 10 days, whether this was the intention or a coincidence of timing. The chain of cause and effect here operates on 2 levels simultaneously. Anna's therapy is real and represents a genuine attempt to address something she is struggling with, which causes Mark to believe Thursday evenings are entirely accounted for. Paul's continued surveillance then reveals that the therapy and the meetings with Victor are both real and both happening, which causes Mark to understand that genuine truths and deceptions can coexist within the same story. The hotel records and photographs are the chain's final link. They transform the investigation from an exercise in suspicion management into a documented reality. Mark's behavior after reading the report, folding it carefully, driving home, making dinner, helping Emma with her penguin album, is the section's most psychologically precise detail. The man who has confirmed what he feared most, choosing, deliberately, to wait for the right moment rather than act from the immediate emotion. This is not avoidance, but preparation. He has the evidence he needs. and he is going to use it when he is ready rather than when the shock is still controlling him. I waited 1 week after Paul's second report. The week was the most controlled week of my life. Controlled in the specific sense of a man who has made a decision about how he is going to handle something and is holding that decision steady against the pressure of everything he is feeling while it waits to be executed. I went to work. I came home. I made dinners and helped Emma with homework and watched a film with Anna on Wednesday evening and held the knowledge inside me like a stone that had found its permanent weight. Julia Carter had been clear: documentation first, confrontation second, legal process third. I had the documentation. I had spoken to Julia the day after Paul's second report, and she had told me what the next steps looked like, and I had understood them and filed them in the part of my mind designated for the practical management of what was coming. The confrontation happened on a Saturday afternoon. Emma was at David's. He had offered, with the specific understanding of someone who knew without being told that I needed the house clear, and I had accepted without having to explain why. Anna was in the living room when I came downstairs, a book open on her lap, the afternoon light coming through the windows in the way it did on clear summer Saturdays. I sat across from her and placed Paul's folder on the coffee table between us. She looked at the folder without touching it. Her expression moved through several things in rapid succession: recognition of what it likely contained, a rapid calculation of available responses, and then a stillness that settled over her face and which I recognized, with some surprise, as something close to relief. "What is that?" she said. "You know what it is," I said. She looked at it for another moment. Then, "How long have you known?" "Long enough," I said. "I want you to open it." She opened it. She looked at the photographs for a moment. Not long. The look of someone confirming rather than discovering, and closed it again. "Victor," I said. "Yes." "How long?" She looked at the window. "Since February." "February." For months before Paul's first report. 6 months total. I had been making 2 cups of coffee for 6 months while this had been happening. "The therapy," I said, "is real," she said immediately. "I started it because of this. Because of what I was doing and what it was doing to me." She paused. "That's not an excuse." "I'm not offering it as an excuse." "I know," I said. "Tell me why." She was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice had the quality of someone setting down something they had been carrying for a long time, not performing honesty, but simply arriving at it because the performance was no longer available. "I felt invisible," she said. "Not because of anything you did, or not only because of anything you did. I felt like the person I was before Emma, before the routines, before everything became about maintenance and scheduling and managing. That person had gone somewhere and no one had noticed. And Victor noticed." "Victor noticed," I repeated. "He made me feel like I was interesting again," she said. "I know how that sounds. It sounds like something you could have said to me." She looked at her hands. "I know. Did you try?" A long pause. "I didn't know how to say it without it sounding like a complaint. Without it sounding like I was telling you that what we had wasn't enough. And instead you told Victor." She didn't answer. Which was the answer? The room was very quiet. The afternoon light had shifted slightly, the summer slowness of it. From outside, the distant sound of a neighbor's lawnmower, which seemed somehow the wrongest possible soundtrack for the conversation we were having. "I want to fix this," she said. "I'll end it completely. I've been trying to end it for weeks. I want counseling, and I want to." "Anna." My voice was steady in a way I found myself grateful for. "I've heard what you're saying. I believe you mean it. What I need you to understand is that I'm not in the same place you are right now. You've been processing this for 6 months. I've been processing it for 2 weeks. I need some time before I can tell you what I'm going to do." She nodded. Her eyes were wet. "But I want you to understand something," I said. "Whatever I decide, Emma is protected. That's not a negotiation. That's the only thing I'm certain about right now." She said she understood. She said Emma was the only thing she was certain about, too. We sat in the quiet living room with Paul's folder on the table between us and the lawnmower outside and the afternoon light going slowly golden, and neither of us said anything else for a long time. Mark's week of waiting after receiving Paul's report is the section's most psychologically significant period. The deliberate suppression of immediate emotional response in service of a confrontation conducted from a position of controlled clarity rather than raw shock. This is not numbness. Mark is feeling everything, but the specific discipline of a man who has decided that the how of the confrontation matters as much as the fact of it. Anna's relief when she sees the folder, genuine, immediate, reveals that the weight of the secret had become its own form of suffering, and that exposure, however catastrophic, releases something. Her explanation, feeling invisible, the person before the routines having gone somewhere, Victor noticing, is honest and painful and does not function as justification but as diagnosis. This is what happened to the marriage, described from the inside by the person who experienced it most acutely. Mark's response, "It sounds like something you could have said to me," is the confrontation's most devastating line because it is accurate and delivered without cruelty. The lawnmower in the background, the golden afternoon light, the ordinary world proceeding entirely indifferent to the conversation happening inside the house is the section's most precise atmospheric detail. Mark's final statement, "Emma is protected, that's not a negotiation," establishes the one certainty he has left and makes it the foundation from which everything else will be built. The 2 weeks after the confrontation were the most unusual of my life. We were still living in the same apartment, still sharing the same kitchen, the same routines, the same daughter who needed breakfast made and stories read, and penguin questions answered with the complete regularity of a child who does not yet know that the ground her life is built on has shifted. We managed this, both of us, with a mutual consideration I found both impressive and heartbreaking, because Emma was 5 and needed the surface to hold even if everything beneath it had changed. Anna ended things with Victor. She showed me the message on Sunday morning, before Emma was awake, sitting at the kitchen table, sliding her phone across to me. The message open on the screen, clear and final and written in the specific language of a woman who had made a decision and was not leaving room for negotiation. I read it and handed the phone back and said thank you. She looked at me. "Does it change anything?" "I don't know yet," I said honestly. David came over on Monday evening. He brought food and the specific companionship of a man who had known me for 26 years and understood that what I needed was not advice but presence. We sat in the kitchen after Emma was asleep and I told him the full shape of it. Paul's report, the confrontation, the 6 months, Victor, all of it. He listened with the stillness of someone absorbing a weight and deciding to share it without being asked. "What are you going to do?" he said. "I've been thinking about that continuously," I said. "I think I already know." "Divorce." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Emma." "Julia Carter," I said. "I'm calling her tomorrow." He nodded and refilled our glasses, and we talked about other things for an hour, and the talking about other things was itself a form of support. The reminder that there was a world outside the apartment, outside the confrontation, outside the folder with its photographs, a world that continued and that I was part of. I called Julia Carter the next morning. She had anticipated the call with the pragmatism of someone experienced at this specific juncture, and she guided me through the next steps with the same precision she had brought to the earlier consultation. We discussed the custody arrangement I wanted, shared, structured, with Emma's stability at the center of every decision. We discussed the timeline and the practical logistics of 2 people separating after 8 years. I moved to a new apartment at the end of July. Not far, 15 minutes from the family home. Close enough that Emma's life between the 2 addresses would not require her to reorganize her world, only to have 2 homes within it. I furnished it simply: a bed, a desk, Emma's things in her room, a kitchen that was smaller than the one I'd left and that I found, with some surprise, suited me in its smallness. Anna and I told Emma together, on a Saturday morning, sitting on either side of her on the living room sofa. We told her in the language a 5-year-old can hold, that Mummy and Daddy were going to live in different houses, that she would have 2 bedrooms with her things in both, that both of us loved her in exactly the same way as always, and that nothing about that was changing. Emma listened with the serious attention she brought to important information and then asked if her penguin encyclopedia could come to Daddy's house too. We told her it could come to both houses. She said okay and slid off the sofa and went to find the encyclopedia, and Anna and I looked at each other across the empty sofa cushion and shared, briefly, the specific grief of 2 people who have failed together at something they both cared about and who are now managing the failure with the most care they have available. I removed my wedding ring the following Monday morning, quietly, before Emma was awake. I put it in the top drawer of my desk in the new apartment and closed the drawer and went to make coffee and stood at the kitchen window in the early morning light and thought. This is the first morning of whatever comes next. It was enough, for the moment, to be clear about that. The divorce decision arrives not as a dramatic resolution, but as the quiet acknowledgement of something Mark had understood since reading Paul's second report. The recognition surfacing fully only when the immediate emotional pressure of the confrontation has passed. The section's most important stage is not the decision itself, but the conversation with Emma on the living room sofa. This is the moment the divorce moves from a decision between two adults to a reality that a 5-year-old has to integrate. And the Penguin Encyclopedia question is the section's most psychologically precise detail. Emma processing the change through the one thing she can control, the location of her most important possession, establishing that continuity is possible even when the structure around it shifts. The point of no return in this story is not the confrontation with Paul's folder, but the 6-month timeline Anna disclosed during it. The affair as a brief crisis might have been navigable. The affair as a 6-month parallel life, with therapy sought to manage the guilt of it, represents a sustained choice repeated daily for half a year, and this duration is what makes the architecture of the marriage unrepairable. Mark's wedding ring in the top desk drawer, the first morning of whatever comes next. These are not melodramatic gestures, but the specific, quiet markers of a life reorganizing itself from its foundations. It's been 7 months since I moved into the apartment with Emma's Penguin Encyclopedia on the shelf in her room. The divorce was finalized in October. Julia Carter managed the process with the precision I had come to rely on, and the outcome was what I had asked for: shared custody, equal time, a structure that gives Emma 2 stable addresses and 2 present parents, which is the best available outcome in a situation that doesn't have a good one. Emma moves between the apartments with the adaptability of a child who has decided that 2 homes means double the space for penguin research. She has established a colony of stuffed penguins at each location and manages their distribution with a seriousness I find both admirable and quietly heartbreaking in the way that children's seriousness about the things they love always is. I've been running in the mornings. This surprised me. I was not a runner before, had never thought of myself as someone who needed the particular discipline of early mornings and outdoor air and the specific mental quiet that physical effort produces. But I found that 40 minutes at 6 o'clock, the city still in its pre-dawn register, the streets quiet and the air cold, and the effort of it demanding just enough attention to silence everything else. This had become something I protected. There is a version of yourself available only in the early morning, I've discovered, and it's worth the alarm. David has been the constant throughout, present when I needed company, absent when I needed space, always honest, and never requiring me to be at a stage of recovery I hadn't actually reached. I had lunch with him last week and realized, for the first time in months, that we'd spent the entire meal talking about things that had nothing to do with the divorce, and that this was its own form of progress. I went hiking in Colorado in September. David's idea. He had a friend with a cabin near Aspen, a long weekend, the specific medicine of altitude and physical effort, and the vast indifference of mountains to human problems. I went without great expectation and found that the mountains delivered exactly what mountains deliver: perspective, which is not the same as comfort, but is sometimes more useful. I met Sophie on the second day of the trip. She was a photographer, commercial and landscape, the kind of work that requires you to look at ordinary things until you see what's actually in them. We talked on a trail for an hour about photography and altitude and the specific quality of light at high elevation that makes everything look like it's been slightly adjusted toward its essential version. She was 32, warm and direct, with a way of paying attention that made you feel the attention was genuine rather than performed. We've been in contact since returning. The distance between Colorado and home has made things measured and deliberate in a way I've found unexpectedly comfortable. Long phone calls in the evenings, photographs she sends of things she's noticed, the slow accumulation of knowing someone new. Nothing certain yet, but something real, something that has arrived without urgency or expectation, and the absence of urgency is itself a kind of gift. What I've carried out of the last year, set down honestly rather than packaged into lessons. I've learned that trust, when it becomes automatic rather than chosen, stops being something you're actually doing. I trusted Anna in the way you trust the floor, without thought, without maintenance, without the understanding that trust is a practice rather than a condition. What I've built since then, slowly, is a different relationship with the concept. trust as something I extend deliberately, with attention, to specific people for specific reasons, rather than as a default setting applied to everyone I care about. I've learned that the invisible work of a marriage, the emotional maintenance, the ongoing attention, the daily choice to actually see the person you're with rather than the familiar outline of them, is not less important than the visible work of shared life. Anna felt invisible inside a marriage that was, from the outside, entirely functional. I don't assign her guilt for what she chose in response to that feeling, but I hold my own portion of the responsibility for the feeling existing, and the holding of that is one of the more difficult and more necessary things I've done. And I've learned, this is what I offer most carefully to anyone in the middle of what I was in the middle of, that the life on the other side of a devastating thing is not a diminished life. It is smaller in some ways, quieter in others, and in certain hours more fully itself than the life before it. The morning runs. Emma's penguin colony distributed between two addresses with careful equity. Sophie's photographs of things she's noticed. The Colorado light. Nearly 1 in 3 marriages encounters a significant breach of trust. 1 in 3. I was one of them. And I want to tell you that the number is neither comfort nor condemnation. It is simply the acknowledgement that the difficulty of sustaining love over years is common enough that no one navigating it is entirely alone. I am building something careful. I am paying attention this time. That is, I think, the only promise worth making. Mark's resolution enacts the story's central irony with complete and earned consistency. The financial analyst who reads patterns and data for a living has spent the story learning to read a different kind of pattern, the emotional pattern of a marriage losing its essential attention, and arrives at the end with a practice rather than a conclusion. The distinction is important. He is not declaring that he has resolved the questions the story raised, but that he has changed the quality of attention he brings to the things that matter. Emma's penguin colony distributed between 2 apartments is the resolution's most quietly devastating detail. The thing a 5-year-old manages with serious equity is the thing the adults around her failed to manage, the fair distribution of presence and attention across the 2 halves of a life. Sophie is introduced with the appropriate lightness of a genuine beginning. Colorado light, photographs of noticed things, the slow accumulation of knowing someone at measured distance. She represents not a solution, but a possibility, the evidence that the capacity for genuine connection survived the damage, and that the quality of attention Mark is now committed to applying can be directed towards something new. The final statement, paying attention this time, is the story's most honest possible conclusion, not a declaration of happiness or resolution, but the commitment of a man who has understood, at real cost, what the absence of attention costs, and who has decided to pay it. Mark's story is the account of a man whose professional intelligence, pattern recognition, data analysis, the ability to see what's coming before it becomes visible to everyone else, was systematically withheld from the context where it was most needed. He reads markets for a living. He did not read his marriage. The story's central irony is not cruel. It is simply the honest account of how emotional investment creates the specific blind spots that professional training cannot reach. We apply our most rigorous thinking to the things we can afford to be wrong about. The things we cannot afford to be wrong about, we protect with comfortable assumption. Anna's arc is rendered with the complexity it deserves. The therapy, real, sought because of the guilt she was carrying, is the story's most humanizing detail about her. She was not simply reckless. She was struggling, and the struggling was genuine even as the response to it caused damage. Her description of feeling invisible, of the person she had been before the routines having gone somewhere unretrieved, is the story's most honest account of how long-term marriages can fail without any single moment of failure. Gradually, through the accumulation of days in which genuine attention was replaced by the comfortable shorthand of familiarity. Emma, at 5 years old, is the story's moral center without knowing it. Her bathroom report in April, her serious management of the penguin colony across 2 addresses, her question about the encyclopedia. These are the observations of a child who has no investment in any particular interpretation and therefore sees clearly. She is the constant in the story's equation, the thing that both parents hold as certain when everything else has become uncertain, and it is in service of her stability that the divorce is handled with the care and absence of drama that Mark commits to. What Mark builds after the divorce is modest, specific, and genuinely his. Morning runs, careful trust, Sophie's Colorado light. These are not compensation for what was lost. They are the materials of a different life, assembled with the quality of attention the previous life had been missing. And that is the story's final, durable lesson. That what we pay attention to is what we actually have, and that attention, given consistently and genuinely, is the only thing worth calling home.